The sky was dark as four massive ships descended from the stars. Each ship was sleek, shining like silver under the dim light of Earth's moon. They were from another world, far beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. The alien girls who piloted these ships were just as extraordinary as their vessels. The first to step off the ship was Zaria, the leader of the group. She was tall, with glowing skin and piercing eyes that seemed to shimmer with intelligence. Her silver hair flowed like a river of light, and she wore an armor-like suit that was both beautiful and deadly. Her three companions, Kayla, Vera, and Yara, followed closely behind, each of them unique in their own way, but all sharing the same confidence that came from knowing they were far superior to the humans below. They stood in a large field, surrounded by the quiet hum of their ships as they touched down. The wind blew softly, the grass swaying beneath their feet. Earth was a primitive planet, in their eyes, nothing compared to the advanced civilization they came from. Zaria couldn't help but smirk as she looked around at the small houses in the distance, the busy streets, and the humble buildings. "This is Earth?" Kayla asked, raising an eyebrow in disbelief. "It's so backward." Zaria chuckled softly. "Yes, this is where we will learn all we need to know. But don't be fooled by their appearance. The humans have a surprising resilience. We'll see if they are worthy of our attention." The girls were on a mission. They had come to study humans, to understand them better. But they were also curious about something else, something darker. Zaria had heard stories of how humans were different from other species, how they could adapt quickly, survive against all odds, and fight fiercely when cornered. She had heard tales of their strange courage and their so-called human spirit. But Zaria didn't believe in such things. To her, humans were just another species to conquer, another world to add to their list of achievements. The girls began to walk towards a small town. It was quiet here, the streets empty of people at this late hour. They wanted to see how the humans lived, what they valued, and maybe have a little fun with them. Zaria's mind was already working, calculating how she could use this situation to their advantage. "Do you think they'll fear us?" Vera asked, her voice full of curiosity. "Fear? No, they'll be in awe of us. We're far beyond their capabilities," Zaria replied confidently. "But we should start small. Test them. I want to see how they react to us." The girls reached the first human they would encounter. He was walking alone, looking up at the stars as he strolled down the street. Ethan was a young man, probably in his early 20s, with short dark hair and simple clothes. He didn't notice the aliens approaching until they were almost right in front of him. At first, Ethan froze. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. Four beautiful women, each one different from the other, were standing before him. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, tall, with glowing skin and eyes that seemed to see through him. They didn't look threatening at first, but something about their presence made him nervous. Zaria, noticing his hesitation, smiled. "Hello, human," she said, her voice smooth and commanding. "We've come from far away. Tell us, how do you live on this primitive world?" Ethan blinked, trying to gather his thoughts. I'm just a regular guy," he stammered. "I live here in this town, work at the local store. Nothing special." The alien girls laughed. To them, his answer was laughable. "Nothing special," Kayla repeated, as if testing the words. "You're nothing more than a simple creature. How boring." Ethan stood tall, trying to appear braver than he felt. "Well, I might be simple, but I'm not boring. I like my life just fine," he replied. The aliens exchanged glances, their amusement growing. Zaria stepped forward, her eyes locked onto Ethan's. "And what makes you think you're worth anything to us? You're nothing compared to us," she said, her tone playful but mocking. Ethan, despite his nerves, held her gaze. He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't sure what was happening, but something told him he had to stand his ground. "Maybe I'm not as smart as you, or as strong, but I'm not going to just bow down to you." Zaria raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his response. Interesting, she whispered. It's rare to find a human with such courage. The alien girls began to circle him, their laughter echoing in the night air. They were testing him, seeing how far they could push him before he broke. But instead of crumbling under their gaze, Ethan stood firm, looking them all in the eye. For a moment, Zaria felt something shift within her, a strange feeling she couldn't quite understand. Was it respect, or was it curiosity? She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing. These humans weren't as weak as she had been led to believe. Well, human, Zaria said after a long pause, we'll see what you're really made of. This will be more interesting than I thought. With that, the girls turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, more confused than ever. He had just met 4 alien girls who had come from the stars, and instead of feeling fear, he felt something else, a strange sense of intrigue. The alien girls may have thought Earth was nothing special, but Ethan was determined to show them they were wrong. This was only the beginning. The human encounter. The next morning, the alien girls returned to the town. The sun was just rising, casting a warm golden glow over everything. As they walked through the streets, they couldn't help but notice the simple beauty of Earth. The flowers, the trees, and the small houses gave the planet a peaceful vibe, but to Zaria, it all seemed like a waste of space. We need to find out more about these humans, Zaria said, her voice steady and sure. Let's see if they have anything worth taking. The others nodded, though Kayla still seemed skeptical. I don't know. They seem so weak. They don't have the power we do. Zaria smirked. That's exactly why we should observe them. They might surprise us. As they walked, they spotted Ethan again. He was standing near a coffee shop, looking at his phone, completely unaware of the 4 alien girls approaching. This time, he wasn't just nervous, he felt strangely calm. Maybe because after their first encounter, he had realized that these strange beings weren't so frightening after all. Zaria was the first to notice Ethan standing there. Her eyes narrowed as she took a few steps toward him. Human, she called out, her voice smooth, like a song. Ethan turned, his heart pounding a little faster. Hi, Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. You again? Zaria smiled, and her eyes seemed to glow. Yes, it's us. You've been on our minds. She stepped closer, her gaze fixed on him. The other alien girls stood behind her, watching him closely. Ethan, despite being taken off guard, held his ground. He could feel the heat of their attention, and while it made him uncomfortable, he didn't want to appear weak. What do you want from me this time? Zaria tilted her head, studying him. Curiosity. You are different from the others we've met here. Most humans run when they see us, but not you. Why is that? Ethan paused. His first instinct was to say something funny, but instead, he shrugged and said, I guess I'm not easily scared. The alien girls exchanged curious glances. They had never met anyone like him before. Most humans would have been afraid, maybe even begging for their mercy, but not this one. Zaria's smile widened. Interesting. You're not what we expected. What are you called, human? Ethan, he replied, finally feeling a little more at ease. And you guys? Zaria raised a finger, signaling to the others to introduce themselves. I am Zaria, she said, and these are my companions, Kayla, Vera, and Yara. Ethan nodded politely, still unsure of how to react. He wasn't sure what was going on, but there was something about these girls that intrigued him. Nice to meet you all, I guess. Vera, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she looked Ethan up and down. I still don't get it, she said. Why aren't you afraid of us? We could easily take you down. Ethan met her eyes without flinching. Maybe because I know you won't. You don't want to hurt me. You're just curious. Zaria watched as Ethan spoke. There was something about him that was different, something that made him stand out. She had expected him to be intimidated by them, but instead, he was calm and even confident. Most humans would have been trembling by now, yet here he was, holding his ground. "Very interesting," Zaria said, her voice smooth. "You're not like the others." She took another step closer, her presence making the air feel heavier. "Tell me, Ethan, do you have any special talents? What makes you so different?" Ethan hesitated, not sure what to say. "I don't know. I guess I'm just good at staying calm in weird situations." Kayla stepped forward, her face serious. "And how do you feel about us? Are you afraid of us now?" Ethan blinked, taking in the question. He glanced at all 4 alien girls. They were beautiful, powerful, and completely out of this world. But somehow he felt no fear. "I'm not afraid. I guess. I don't really know what to think about you yet." Zaria looked at him thoughtfully. She was used to getting what she wanted, and for some reason, she couldn't read Ethan. He was different from anyone she'd met before. Most people would be begging for mercy by now, but not him. "Good," Zaria said after a long pause. "I like that. You're not as weak as I thought. You might be useful to us." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Useful? For what?" Zaria's smile turned a little sharper. "We'll see. You're more interesting than I expected, human." She looked at the others, then back at Ethan. "We might be able to use you in ways you can't even imagine." Ethan didn't know what she meant, but there was something about her words that sent a shiver down his spine. He still didn't trust these aliens, but he couldn't deny that they were fascinating. He had never met anyone like them before. "Well, I don't know about being useful, but I guess we'll find out," Ethan said, his voice steady. With that, Zaria turned away. The girls followed her, but before leaving, she glanced back at him. "Don't get too comfortable, Ethan. We'll be watching you." As the alien girls walked away, Ethan stood there, feeling both confused and strangely exhilarated. He had no idea what was coming next, but he had a feeling his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. Ethan's strength. The days passed, and Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the alien girls. Every time he saw them in the streets, they watched him closely, their strange eyes always full of curiosity. It was as if they were studying him, trying to figure out what made him so different from the other humans. One afternoon, as he walked through the park, he saw Zaria and Kayla sitting on a bench. Ethan wasn't sure if he should approach them, but something inside him told him he should. They had been watching him for days now, and he was getting used to their strange presence. "Hey," he said, walking up to them with a slight nod. Zaria looked up at him with that same piercing gaze. "Ethan," she said coolly, her voice as smooth as ever. "We've been wondering something. Why are you so strong?" Ethan blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Zaria raised an eyebrow. "You act calm, collected, even when we're around. Most humans are terrified of us, yet you seem unbothered. Why?" Ethan hesitated for a moment. He didn't know how to explain it. "I guess I've been through a lot in my life. It's made me stronger, in a way. I'm not scared of things that I don't understand." Kayla, who had been silent up until now, looked at him with a sharp gaze. "So, you're saying you're strong because of your life experiences?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I guess you could say that." Zaria looked at him thoughtfully. "Interesting. You're different than the others. But your strength, it's not just mental, is it?" Ethan's curiosity grew. "What do you mean?" Kayla stood up, stepping closer to Ethan. Her eyes narrowed, studying him carefully. "We've seen how you stand tall in front of us, even though we are far more powerful. You don't flinch, you don't back away. That's something we don't see often. It's strange." Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of their attention. It was almost as if they were trying to figure out his every move. "I don't know what you expect from me," he said, his voice steady. "I'm just a guy who tries to keep his head up, no matter what comes at him." Zaria studied him carefully, her eyes glowing faintly. She was starting to see that Ethan's strength wasn't just about his physical power. It was something deeper, something she hadn't expected to find in a human. "You're more than just strong in body," Zarya said, finally breaking the silence. "You're strong in spirit. That's what sets you apart from the others." Ethan looked at her, surprised by her words. "I don't know about all that," he replied. "I just deal with what life throws at me." Kayla seemed intrigued by Ethan's words. "Perhaps you are more useful to us than we thought," she said softly, as if talking to herself. Zarya turned to her companions, her eyes still on Ethan. "We have seen many humans. Most are weak. But you're not like them. Your strength is something we could use." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean by that? You keep saying use, but I'm not sure what you're getting at." Zarya smiled. "You'll see soon enough, human. We have plans for you, but first, we need to test you." Ethan's heart raced. He didn't know if he was ready for whatever they had planned, but he knew there was no turning back. "Test me?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Zarya stood up, her eyes flashing with excitement. "Yes, a challenge. We need to see how strong you really are." Before Ethan could respond, Kayla stepped forward, her face serious. "We've heard of your skills, Ethan, but we want to see it firsthand. Prove your strength to us." Ethan had no choice but to accept. The idea of being tested by these powerful alien girls both excited and terrified him. He didn't know what kind of test they had in mind, but he wasn't about to back down. If they were going to push him, then he would show them what he was made of. Zarya and Caleb led him to a secluded area in the park. The others, Vera and Yara, followed closely behind. They had all been waiting for this moment. Zarya spoke first, her voice low and commanding. "You will fight us, Ethan," she said, her eyes gleaming. "Show us how strong you really are." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. A fight? Against 4 alien girls? He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, but there was no way out. He had to prove himself. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. If he could survive this, maybe they would finally understand what he was capable of. Zarya moved first, faster than he expected. She lunged toward him with surprising speed. Ethan barely had time to react, but he managed to dodge her attack just in time. The alien girl smirked, impressed by his reflexes. "Not bad, human," Zarya said, circling him. "But can you handle the rest of us?" Ethan's body tensed. He didn't know how much longer he could keep this up. But one thing was for sure. He wasn't going to back down. He had to show them that he wasn't just another weak human. He was stronger than they could imagine. Strange feelings. The days after Ethan's encounter with the alien girls were strange. He couldn't stop thinking about them. Every time he saw Zarya, Kayla, Vera, or Yara, something inside him would stir, a feeling he couldn't explain. Kayla raised an eyebrow but said nothing else. She turned and walked away, signaling for Zarya to follow her. Ethan stood there for a moment, his head spinning. The feelings inside him were so strong now, so confusing. Why did he feel like this? Why did he want to stay close to them, even though he knew it was dangerous? He had to get away. He needed to think. Ethan turned and walked in the opposite direction, his legs moving without thinking. But as he walked, his mind raced. The feeling in his chest wouldn't go away. The strange pull toward Zarya and the others was growing stronger, and it was becoming harder and harder to ignore. What was happening to him? As Ethan walked through the park, he couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. What did Zarya and the others really want from him? And why couldn't he stop thinking about them? The answers were still unclear, but one thing was certain. Things were changing, and he wasn't sure he was ready for what was coming. The unexpected pregnancy. Ethan couldn't believe what had just happened. He stood in his small apartment, staring at the small blue vial in his hand. It was the only evidence left of a night that had changed everything. A night he would never forget. The alien girls had insisted on getting closer to him. They had been curious, fascinated by Earth and its people. But that night, everything had crossed a line. Zaria, Kayla, Vera, and Yara, each of them had come to him, drawn by that strange pull that seemed to grow stronger every day. At first, he had tried to resist. He told himself it was just a temporary thing, that it was just curiosity. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. It wasn't just about attraction. It was something deeper, something powerful. And that night, it had happened. They had all been together, and now Ethan could feel it in his bones. Something had changed inside him. Something that couldn't be undone. Ethan shook his head, trying to push the thoughts out of his mind. He had no idea what was happening. He had always been careful, always protected himself. But the alien girls were different. Their biology, their very beings were unlike anything he had ever known. And now, they had left him with a strange feeling of unease that wouldn't go away. The sound of the doorbell broke his thoughts. Ethan walked over, trying to ignore the heavy feeling in his stomach. He opened the door, and there stood Zaria, Kayla, Vera, and Yara, their expressions serious. They had been to his apartment before, but today felt different. They were no longer just curious visitors. There was something urgent in their eyes. "We need to talk," Zaria said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her tone was firm, but there was an unfamiliar softness in it too. Ethan felt his heart race as he stepped back to let them in. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. He had a feeling he knew what this was about, but he wasn't ready to face it. Kayla walked over to him, her eyes cold but steady. "Ethan," she began, "there's something we need to tell you." She looked at the others, and for the first time, Ethan noticed the worry on their faces. It wasn't something he had seen before, and it made him uneasy. "After our time together," Kayla continued, "something unexpected happened." She paused, glancing at the others. We're pregnant." Ethan froze. His mind went blank. He didn't hear the words properly at first. Pregnant? How was that possible? He had been careful. He had. The reality hit him hard, like a punch to the stomach. "What?" he stammered. "How can that even happen? You're aliens." Zaria stepped forward, her gaze steady, but filled with a strange mix of confusion and worry. "Our biology, it's different, but not in the way you might think. We didn't expect this either. But we're carrying your child, Ethan." Ethan's legs felt weak, and he sank into a nearby chair. "This can't be real. It doesn't make sense." Vyra, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. "We didn't want this to happen, Ethan, but it did. And now, we need to figure out what comes next. We didn't know if you would want to be part of this." Yara added softly, "We've been in contact with our people. We're not sure how this is going to affect us, or you, but we can't ignore it." Ethan looked at each of their faces, feeling the wave of emotions crash over him. Shock, disbelief, fear. He had never imagined something like this happening, especially not with alien women. But now, it was real. The evidence was right there in front of him. They were pregnant. His mind raced with questions. What did this mean for him? For them? For Earth? I don't know what to say, Ethan admitted, his voice shaky. He stood up, pacing across the room. "This is too much. I didn't think this would happen. I didn't think any of this would happen." Zaria watched him carefully. "I understand this is overwhelming. It's new for all of us. But we need your help, Ethan. We need you to be part of this. Whether you want to or not, your child is coming into this world. And we need to know what to do." Ethan paused, his mind spinning. His entire world had just been turned upside down. A part of him wanted to run, to find a way out of this strange situation. But another part of him, deep inside, felt responsible. These alien women were carrying his child. No matter how strange it was, no matter how unexpected, he couldn't ignore that. He sighed, rubbing his temples. I never thought it would come to this. I never thought I'd be the father of an alien child." "We know this is hard," Kayla said, her voice gentle for once. "But we don't want to face this alone. We need you, Ethan." The weight of the situation settled heavily on his shoulders. There was no easy way out of this. Ethan had no choice but to face the reality of what had happened. The unexpected pregnancy was a new chapter for all of them, one they would have to figure out together. "I'll help," Ethan said quietly, though his mind was still in turmoil. "I don't know how, but I'll help." The alien girls looked at him, and for the first time, there was a look of relief in their eyes. They didn't know what the future would hold, but for now, they knew they wouldn't face it alone. As they left his apartment that evening, Ethan stood by the window, staring out at the city lights. His life had changed forever. He didn't know what came next, but he was ready to face it. Whatever it was, facing the reality. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, staring blankly at the cup of coffee in front of him. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, confusion, fear, and a strange sense of responsibility. The words from the alien girls echoed in his head. "We're pregnant. Your child is coming." He couldn't escape the feeling that everything he knew was slipping away. How had his life become so complicated? Just days ago, he was living a normal, predictable life. Now, he was caught in a situation with 4 alien women, and somehow, he was going to be a father to an alien child. The thought seemed impossible, yet it was true. He took a deep breath and stood up. His apartment felt too small, too quiet. The walls seemed to close in around him. He needed to do something. Anything to clear his head. Just then, the doorbell rang. Ethan froze. He knew who it was. He didn't have to check the peephole to confirm. It was Zaria, Kayla, Vera, and Yara, his 4 unexpected visitors, the mothers of his unborn child. He opened the door, and they walked in without a word. They didn't need to speak. The tension in the room was enough to fill the silence. Zaria, the leader of the group, was the first to break the silence. "Ethan, we need to talk. About the future, about what happens now." Ethan nodded slowly, his heart heavy. He had been avoiding this conversation, hoping that somehow it would go away. But it wasn't going to. The pregnancy was real, and it was happening. And now he had to face the reality of it. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about it too. A lot." Kayla stepped forward. Her usually confident demeanor was now tinged with uncertainty. "We don't know what to do, Ethan. Our people are not ready for this. They don't know how to handle the situation. And we're not sure how we fit into your world, or if we even belong here." Ethan looked at them, seeing the fear in their eyes. These were strong women, powerful and confident. But now, they were vulnerable. They had been thrust into a world they didn't understand, and it was up to him to help them navigate it. "We don't know how our bodies will change," Vyra added, her voice soft but serious. "The pregnancy is progressing quickly, and with our biology being so different from yours, we don't know if the baby will be different too. If it's safe for us, for you, for the child." Ethan's heart sank. He had no answers. He wasn't a doctor. He didn't know anything about alien biology, but he couldn't let them face this alone. They had trusted him, and now he had to trust them in return. "We'll figure it out," he said, though his voice trembled slightly. "I don't have all the answers, but I'll help. I'll be here for you, and for the child." Yara, who had been standing quietly by the door, spoke up. "We don't want to burden you, Ethan. We don't want to force you into something you don't want. But we don't know where to turn. We have no one else." The weight of their words hit him hard. They didn't have anyone. They were alone on a strange planet, carrying a human child. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about them, about their future, and the future of the child they were all bringing into the world. "I'm not going to leave you," Ethan said firmly, his voice gaining strength. "I'm in this with you, all of you. I may not know everything, but I will learn. I'll do whatever I can to help." Zaria gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Ethan. That means more to us than you know." Kayla nodded. "We're scared, Ethan, but we're not scared of you. We're scared of the unknown, of what comes next." Ethan looked at them, seeing the vulnerability behind their strong exteriors. They were just like him in that moment, lost, unsure, and terrified. But they were also brave. They were facing a reality they had never expected, and they were doing it together. "We'll face it together," Ethan said, trying to reassure them. "We'll find a way to make this work." There was a brief moment of silence as they all absorbed the gravity of the situation. The future was uncertain, and no one had any answers. But for the first time in days, Ethan felt like maybe, just maybe, they could make it through this together. Zaria, who had been quiet for a moment, spoke again. "What about the humans? What about Earth? Will they accept us?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I don't know if the world is ready for this, but we'll have to figure that out too. One step at a time." The uncertainty was overwhelming, but at least they weren't facing it alone. Ethan wasn't sure where this strange journey would take them, but he was ready to walk that path. He had no other choice. As they sat down together at the kitchen table, the conversation continued. They talked about what would happen next, about their fears and hopes for the future. There were still so many questions, and the answers were nowhere in sight. But for the first time, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle in his chest. The future was unknown, but they would face it together. And that was all he could ask for. A new future. Ethan stood at the window, looking out over the city. The early morning sun cast a warm glow over the buildings, but his mind was far from calm. His thoughts were a mess, just like the future. Everything was changing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. It had been several weeks since the alien girls had arrived, and now their pregnancies were starting to show. Zaria, Kayla, Vera, and Yara were each carrying a child. His child. It was real now. This wasn't just a dream or something he could ignore. He was going to be a father, but not just any father. He was going to raise a child with 4 alien mothers. Ethan rubbed his temples, trying to push away the overwhelming feeling of uncertainty. He had learned so much in such a short time. There were things about their biology, their cultures, and even their way of thinking that were so different from his own. But he had come to understand something important. This was his responsibility now. These women, these children, needed him, and he wasn't going to back away from them. The door creaked open behind him. He turned to see Zaria standing there, her face calm but her eyes full of questions. "Ethan," she said softly, stepping into the room. "We need to talk about the future." Ethan took a deep breath and nodded. The future. It was a heavy word, one that he had been avoiding thinking about for too long. But it was time to face it. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice steady despite the racing thoughts in his head. Zaria hesitated for a moment before speaking. "We've been talking," she said. "We need to make decisions about where we go from here, about what happens to our children, and to us." Ethan looked at her, his heart heavy. He knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Eventually, the world would find out about them. The pregnancy, the alien mothers, everything. It was all going to come to light sooner or later. He just didn't know how to deal with it. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about that too. The world isn't ready for this. For us." Zaria nodded, her eyes sad but determined. "I agree. But we have to figure out how to live in this world. We can't hide forever. Our children can't grow up in secret." Ethan felt a weight settle on his shoulders. He had always been an ordinary man. He'd never imagined himself in this kind of situation. But now his life was tied to these women and their children. They weren't just visitors. They were family. And no matter how hard it seemed, he couldn't walk away from them. "I don't know what to do," Ethan said, his voice shaky. "I don't know how to make the world accept us." Zaria walked over to him, placing a hand gently on his arm. "We'll figure it out. Together. We have to. For our children." Ethan looked into her eyes, seeing the strength in her gaze. She was right. They had to face the world, no matter how scary it seemed, and they would do it together. Just then, Kayla entered the room. "We've been thinking," she said, her tone serious but hopeful. "Maybe it's time to tell people. Not everyone, but maybe a few. We need to find those who will help us, not judge us." Ethan turned to her, his heart pounding. "You think that's a good idea?" Kayla nodded. "It's the only idea we have. Hiding won't work forever. We need to find allies. People who can help us, who won't be afraid of us." Ethan sighed, feeling the weight of the decision. "I'm scared, Kayla. I don't know how to make them understand." "You don't have to do it alone," she said. "We're with you, Ethan, and we'll face this together." Vyra and Yara appeared in the doorway, their expressions serious but resolute. Vera spoke first. "The world will change. It may take time, but it will change. We can make it better. For our children. For everyone." Yara, who had been quiet for most of the conversation, finally spoke up. "And we have each other. That's what matters. As long as we stand together, we can face whatever comes." Ethan looked at them all. Zeria, Kayla, Vera, and Yara. His heart swelled with emotion. They had come into his life, turned it upside down, and now they were asking him to step up, to be a part of their future. It was a future he hadn't planned, but now he couldn't imagine living without them. "I'll do it," he said finally, his voice filled with determination. "I don't know how, but I'll do it. I'll help you. I'll help us." The room seemed to breathe with a collective sigh of relief. They didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, they had a plan, a future, and then the unexpected happened. The doorbell rang. Ethan froze. He hadn't expected anyone. Not today. Not like this. Zeria and Kayla exchanged a nervous glance. "Do you think it's time?" Zeria asked softly. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "It's time." He walked to the door, his hands trembling. This was the moment. The world would know about them soon. About their children. About everything.